Have you ever watched a John Woo movie? I'm sorry, this is an important question for me to ask. I've just gotta know if you have good taste. To me, it's either you've seen the greatest gunfights put onto film, or you haven't. Maybe not his Hollywood stuff like Mission Impossible 2, I'm more so talking about his Hong Kong classics. The Killer, Bullet in the Head, Hard Boiled. They're all bangers remembered for their chaotic but wonderful gunfights. Especially that hospital scene in Hard Boiled, like, God, what a movie. Clouds of debris, flurries of bullets, good old gun-fu acrobatics. This is the magic of Hong Kong action. There's no doubt that this shit kicks ass. These movies are more than just spectacles, they're canvases of violence painted by the hectic brushes of gorgeous destruction. But it's not just John Woo making great action flicks. There are plenty of other talented Hong Kong directors. To name some, there's Johnny To, Ringo Lam, Tsui Hark, Sammo Hung, and fuck it, I'm throwing in Wong Kar-wai too, even though he's more about making romance movies. Why am I including him? Well, Wong Kar-wai, like every other director that I mentioned, has a keen eye for style and making scenes visually appealing. Alongside the brilliant action and visuals of these blood operas, you've got slick, cool-headed protagonists who remain calm in the heat of gunfire. A contrast to the hellfire of bullets and explosions. So with many video games looking to movies for inspiration, which can be argued to have caused more harm than good, trying to recreate the intense but visually cathartic gunfights of John Woo's Hong Kong movies seems only natural for the industry to do. Who wouldn't want to be in the shoes of Hard-Boiled Tequila after seeing any of those shootouts? That's what Remedy Entertainment set out to do.
His fight against the nightmare drug Valkyr took a turn for worse.
The Finnish game studio started off their career with the violent car race deathmatch game Death Rally, released in 1996. Published by Apogee Software, Death Rally was a neat little bit of car-perpetrated ultraviolence. Anybody who's familiar with Remedy will quickly notice how different Death Rally is as compared to the games they're known for. It's the most arcadey and, to put it simply, the most 90s game they've ever developed. Raw gameplay at the forefront with a narrative as an afterthought. Such was the way when games were good. There are some glimpses into the overarching ideas of Remedy's game design. Death Rally demonstrates Remedy's appetite for dramatic violence. Cars burn tracks onto the roads, spectators turn into sanguine puddles. The music is banging. Death Rally is a fun, though admittedly difficult way to spend an hour or two. The AI are brutal, the maps are winding. It's pretty much an unforgiving game if you don't know what you're doing. The more obvious reason why Remedy's debut title differs from their more notable work is, well, it isn't a third-person shooter, a genre in which the company were pioneers and innovators of. Right after Death Rally, Remedy returned to Apogee wanting to work on another game and to continue their great relationship. What came from their talks was a game called Dark Justice, a third-person shooter inspired by Tomb Raider and Interplace Loaded, but more importantly, the explosive violence of John Woo's Hong Kong action blood operas. Though, seeing how generic of a name Dark Justice was, they renamed the project to Max Heat, and Apogee's 3D Realms was more than satisfied to be producing Remedy's next game. Here's a funny tidbit. After spending about 15 to 20 grand on trademarking Max Heat, somebody at Remedy suggested the last name Payne, which was an instant hit with everybody, so 3D Realms then spent more buckets of money on the new name.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the pain in the butt. Pain to the max.
You're killing me.
Max Payne was going to be big for Remedy, 3D Realms, the games industry, and the one company I forgot to mention, Rockstar Games. Remedy was the main developer, with 3D Realms pitching in a lot of time and money to help them, but Rockstar had come in to help with porting the game onto the PS2, Xbox, and even the Game Boy Advance? What? What? Weirdly enough, the GBA port is probably the closest thing to the original idea of using a top-down camera, since the port is in an isometric view. Rockstar's involvement in the Max Payne franchise would quickly become much more intimate, but for the first game, it pretty much revolved around porting. With development spanning 4 years, and 2 of those years due to delaying the original 1999 release date, Max Payne was available for purchase in 2001, having been published by God, or Gathering of Developers. The delay had thankfully paid off as the game amassed critical acclaim and was loved by many, cementing itself as a classic to be remembered. I mean, why else would the game and its sequel be getting full-blown remakes as well as having a dedicated community to mod and support the game through fan patches? Either way, both are great since the game needs some love in order to run on modern systems. In the description, I linked the Steam guide that helped me run the game on my computer for anybody that needs it. PC Gaming Wiki links to Paysoto's patch, which also worked for me, but since I'm trying to record my playthroughs in OBS, the game was not very happy when I even had the software open. So if one option doesn't work for you, try the other. The first thing that Remedy did to realize their vision with Max Payne was to develop its engine, which they titled Max Effects. With the increasing power of technology, Remedy saw fit to develop their own powerful game engine. Fun fact, the engine was actually so powerful that it was used for Future Mark's 3D Mark benchmarking software. A lot of marks, I know, but the point is that Remedy had made some pretty good tools for their project. Remedy would keep building up Max Effects until 2012 with the release of Alan Wake. After that, they made their Northlight engine, which is a spiritual successor of sorts to Max Effects, by being capable of continuing to create Remedy's trademark particles. Back to 2001 though, this is getting ahead of the video. With Max Effects, the engine allowed for the Finnish studio to create their amazing particle effects and achieve a closer level of photorealism. Well, this was photorealism back in 01. But it also literally was photorealism in the sense that the textures are reference photos that Remedy had taken either in-house or in New York. Due to the game's age, the graphics have technically not aged very well. The textures are muddled and some models have very low poly counts. But I still think the game looks pretty great. It's got a weird sort of half-realistic, half-impressionistic look to the world. Kind of like the Thief games, if that makes any sense. These look like real places, real streets, real alleys, but they're also dramatized to be colder than how they'd actually be. Fitting for the century's worst blizzard that torments Max's crusade of the underworld. Max goes through the ringer as the underdog, fighting thugs in dungeon-like back rooms, mercenaries in glacial industrial zones, and private security in sterile, soulless offices. Nowhere is welcoming to Max. He's trouble to just about everybody. Not even Max's own mind treats the guy nicely. Nightmarish distortions of a suburban past haunt Max, making him relive the traumatic death of his family over and over. So with that being said, don't expect to be greeted with smiles anywhere. Taking advantage of their newly attained photorealism, Remedy has the faces of employees, friends, family, and maybe even a pizza guy or two on the models of the different mobsters, Valkyrie addicts, and suited security. Max Payne's face is that of Sam Lake, Remedy's lead writer at the time and current creative director. Lake's grim smile is forever remembered as Max Payne's face, further enforced by how Sam acts as Max Payne in the graphic novels that tell the majority of the game's story. The comics presentation is a bit amateurish. Not everybody is an actor at Remedy, but it's impossible for me to dislike. Like, come on. Can you really hate on how charming it is to just have this garage band crew of developers coming together to pose as mobsters and even asking their families to help them? Sam Lake got his fucking mom to be the lead antagonist of the story, which is a pretty funny detail to remember when you see the two go up against each other in game. It's a nice contrast to the deeply serious and dark story of Max Payne, which Remedy knew was important to give a break to at the right moments. There are 3D cutscenes in the game, but they're not very long, maybe because of an engine limitation or just because of style choices. Using graphic novels to tell the majority of the story was a budget constraint, but that limitation bred some ingenious creativity. It's similar today in how some games, usually indies, have some animated 2D drawings for their cutscenes to save time and money so they can prioritize other aspects of the game. The voice acting is really good in these cutscenes. James McCaffrey portrays Max Payne excellently, a husk of a man with gloomy guy disorder, scarred by trauma and tired of bullshit. But none of that won't stop him from cracking out some one-liners or smart-ass bits if he wants to.
I'm Frankie to Bet Niagara.
Niagara, as in you cry a lot?
And don't think it's McCaffrey doing all of the work. There's more notable voice acting done by John Randolph Jones as Alfred Woden and Jane Gennaro's evil portrayal of Nicole Horn. Seriously, of the voice acting roles, Jane Gennaro is up there as one of my favorites.
How sweet. I get to kill two birds with one stone.
Though I'd have to argue that the mobsters tie it all together. They're cartoonishly henchman-like, spitting out stereotypical New Yorker lingo or just acting like boneheads.
Just forget about it.
The mobsters follow a general rule of the characters in the game by being characters of themselves. Crooked cops are corrupt as hell, private security are sociopaths, Mona Sachs is a femme fatale, It's some great characterization that paints a world of theatrics. The music adds on to the absurd dramatization of the game's world. Melancholic pianos and strings for the hard-boiled detective, brooding bass guitars and synths in the tense moments between gunfights, and the jumping bravado of rock music fitting for an 80s action movie that pushes you forward. I really like the soundtrack. It always complemented the game and pretty much never took away from the atmosphere that the ambiance sets up. The only bad thing that I can think of, which isn't really all too bad and is more of a nitpick, is how the music can abruptly switch to Max's theme during cutscenes or inspecting points of interest.
The word on Lisa Punchinello was that she was a bit of a witch. The tarot cards on the kitchen table fit the picture.
It just seems too instant and almost knocks me out of the world. Though the guns pull me back in. Each gun has a distinct sound and sounds as powerful as they should for their respective part of the arsenal. The shotgun sounds beefy, the Colt Commando is a cannon, the Berettas are humble but still deadly, and the Ingrams sound like they're shooting out flurries of angry bees. It's some great sound design, but the best part of it is that you can make out what guns you're being shot at with without having to see the enemies. Being able to know what weapon a thug is using makes it easier to prioritize the guy with an Ingram over the guy with just some Berettas. How well the game is able to communicate information through sounds alone is very useful in hectic gunfights. I mean, the clacking of grenades hitting walls is practically burned into my memory. The audio does make combat the chaotic lottery for survival it is, but it's really the particles that makes Max Payne an extravaganza. Remedy rips out the explosions of debris that litter Hong Kong action. Violent bursts of electricity, puffs of dust followed by crumbling bits of wall, streams of leaking water. The environment reacts to your bullets as much as the enemies do. They let out splats of blood, but the environments make the combat shine with their exaggerated destruction, from scrumming fire extinguishers to computer monitors exploding in a fireball. Through the crazy combat, the orchestral gunfire is the backtrack to the stage being decorated with bullet holes and explosions. The destruction may not be as explosive as, say, maybe f.e.a.r. or the later Max Payne entries, but it's still quite a thrill to see the room be trashed even if it is a bit subdued. Adding to the thrill though is the game's main selling point that almost everybody associates with Max Payne to this day: bullet time. While the game was released after The Matrix, the usage of slow-mo during combat, also known as bullet time, was an idea for Max Payne since early development, since maybe 1997. Starting out as just a cool slow-mo kill cam, Remedy then turned the slow motion feature into a gameplay mechanic after Scott Miller of 3D Realms had told them it would be cooler that way. And he was damn right. Remedy even expanded upon the original idea by adding the gunfu lunges and rolling to bullet time to make it more exciting. What's cooler than slow-mo? Dodging bullets while in slow-mo. So while bullet time seems like a concept that was taken from The Matrix, even though other pieces of media had it before The Matrix, Remedy had already planned on implementing slow motion into Max Payne before that movie's release. The only thing explicitly inspired by The Matrix is this one little lobby shootout, though I have a feeling there may have been a bit more influence. Back on topic. Bullet time is fucking awesome. While a tiny bit janky, or at least with the audio, the mechanic makes combat incredibly fun and visually entrancing. Max Payne doesn't make the use of hit-scan enemies like in many games. Every bullet you shoot, get hit by, and see fly through the air are the actual projectiles that guns fire in the game. Watching them soar past Max or guiding them into an enemy's path is like witnessing a flock of death, graceful in flight. Gameplay-wise, bullet time is a necessity. It's certainly doable without the mechanic, but with automatic weapons and snipers, the ability to slow down time is absolutely life-saving. Besides that, activating a bullet time lunge will reload your weapon instantly, so you can essentially fire 2 magazines in one go. Though you can't keep up the God Act forever. You have a limited supply of the ability, as shown by the hourglass in the bottom left. Killing enemies refills the hourglass, but you'll have to manage the ability so that you can have enough juice for the harder fights. Some encounters are much harder than others, while others are unreasonably much easier. A room may be too cramped to avoid bullets, while another room may be filled with only 3 goons, when it should probably have more. These instances are far and few, in between many great levels that more properly satiate Max's need for revenge. You go from all sorts of buildings, with the best gunfights happening indoors or in tight alleys and backstreets if they take place outside. Levels don't get too big. keeping combat intimate for the most part, but they do get a bit expansive at times. From city rooftops to seaside docks to the lobby of a corporate building, levels tend to remind you that the compact gunfights are only smaller parts of a larger picture. To help Max set things right in his life, the arsenal of weapons meet and exceed the standards of John Woo's pyrotechnics guy. Every weapon is a scaled down howitzer with their power. The Berettas are fast and accurate, but pack the least punch of the firearms, but are still good enough for the entirety of the game. The Deagle packs more of a punch, but fires slower. The shotguns come in 3 flavors: the classic pump action, a widespread sawed-off double barrel, and the thundering automatic barrage of buckshot from the jackhammer. Then there's the automatic weapons with the bullet hose known as the Ingram and the reliably dangerous Colt Commando. The Commando in particular quickly becomes the workhorse weapon for the endgame, being both accurate and powerful with a steady supply of bullets from the mercs and suits. Lastly, there's the explosives and sniper rifle, both doing what you'd expect them to do, but in Max Payne's ridiculously glorious exaggeration. Fireball infernos for the explosives, and a sick as hell camera following the sniper rifle bullets. Every weapon is viable, only restrained by the situation and ammo pool, but the one weapon you'd pretty much never use is the melee weapon. The lead pipe and baseball bat are almost never used except for that one pseudo-stealth section that almost breaks the flow of the game. The bat can kill an enemy in at least 3 hits, but once you're swarmed by more enemies, it's game over. There's a reason why none of the goons you fight charge you with a bat or a lead pipe. They're smart enough to know that they suck. The AI is also smart enough to know that they should play aggressively against you. Usually coming in groups of 3 to 5, the enemies charge you with their guns in hand, pretty much always running and gunning. Sometimes they even run out of sight, like they were getting into a better position or flanking. They all use the same weapons as you, so you can easily eat asphalt to one burst from an Ingram. Though, that isn't to say that they're the world's deadliest henchmen. With good aim and bullet time, you can make quick work out of the encounters, but also dodge rolling in between attacks is just as effective. The enemies can also work with their environment against you. Obviously, I mean using cover, and also knowing when would be a good time to throw grenades when you enter certain choke points. This is pretty much scripted. It's nothing like f.e.a.r's AI that perfectly works in tandem with that game's tight level design to create the illusion of super soldiers working together as a hive mind, but Max Payne's enemies can surprise you every once in a while. The levels are organized to feel like you're pushing forward, quite literally since Max Payne is a linear game. That isn't to say that linear game design is bad though. There's this weird conception that linearity is a sign of poor quality, but sometimes a game being too open can make the experience horrible. The correct way of thinking about linear versus expansive level design is to recognize that games leaning too far into either direction often leads to a video game feeling like it's a piece of shit. Plus, you gotta consider what a game is trying to go for. Yeah, it's a game design conundrum. It's a fine balance to maneuver when creating a video game on whether you want to have the player explore more or just move towards the end of the level. Max Payne does a good job at being linear while also giving tidbits of exploration. The hallways that lead into enemy-filled rooms that lead to more hallways which lead into more enemy-filled rooms, etc. is a suitably great design philosophy for the game. Constantly moving from shootout to shootout with some breathing room in between keeps Max Payne from overpowering your senses and maintaining the mysterious detective aura that Max exudes. During downtime, you can find optional objects to inspect, listen to a nearby TV's program or to thugs chatting, and you can also interact with some of the furniture in the world to find more ammo or healing painkillers. Besides interacting with the world through your guns, you can interact with a bunch of different things, which gives you something to just fiddle around with in downtimes. It makes the areas feel more lived in or tangible, like they're rooms that had uses for the people living in the world and not just another set piece for violence. It's like classic build engine games where they would expand upon the world's liveliness by letting you do something as simple as flushing a toilet. Aside from the level set dressing, the design of the levels are pretty great. There are some levels that loop back onto themselves which are great additions, sometimes even standouts, but the mostly moving forward feel of the levels is good enough that I never wished for any end to the shooting gallery that is this game. If the levels were too open, then it would lose focus on the spectacle and Max Payne would become drab. I mean, the biggest area in this game uses the sniper rifle as an attempt to sustain the visual flair of its combat, which, to be honest, it doesn't do a very good job at because there aren't that many enemies to shoot at. You can go loot the sniper towers so that more enemies spawn, but they're optional so people can miss this in their first playthrough or whatever. I just kind of wish this area was done a little bit better. Though, how is the writing To say the least, Sam Lake is a creative motherfucker. From the Norse mythology to the noir influence, Max Payne's story is still pretty enjoyable, albeit not as fresh as it once was. The story's plot sums up to Max getting revenge for his partner's death, but while doing so, he jumps down a rabbit hole of conspiracies involving the mob, private corporation, and a superdrug that all eventually lead to getting revenge for the death of his family. It's a dark story of betrayal and mystery, filled with twists and great characters. It's one big action-packed tragedy. There's not one bit that felt like filler or felt boring, since action always came when needed and the mystery kept unfolding with each magazine Max emptied. The game is paced pretty well, with levels never feeling misplaced or rushed into the story. It starts off mostly as a slow burn through dingy buildings, but then quickly builds up into the explosive set pieces that are the stars of the show. It's just like a woo flick. You've got the hectic flurries of debris and bullets, followed by bittersweet moments of melodrama. In Max Payne's case, rather than the beautiful friendships of, say, the killer, although there are hints of those relationships, the melodrama in Max Payne is accompanied by a noir-like investigation for vengeance. I already made it beyond clear that the game's key influence was Hong Kong action.
It's me. Open up. Let me in, quick.
Not so fast. The password. John who?
Come on. Okay, John Woo.
All right.
But I want to also mention another source of inspiration for the game, which was vital in shaping the character and tone of Max Payne: classic noir detective films. Specifically, those that starred Humphrey Bogart, whose acting career is synonymous with the hard-boiled detective archetype. Like Sam Spade of The Maltese Falcon or Philip Marlowe of The Big Sleep, Max Payne is as cynical as the detectives of yore. He's pessimistic about the world, seeing only the corrupt and the evil. He's tired of all the bullshit that surrounds him. But he's got the charm of Chow Yun-Fat's tequila, wanting to do his job without the bureaucracy and prioritizing humanity rather than concepts like reputation, careers, or rank. Max is a great character in the medium of video games, and he's grown more interesting as the games went on. This was out of the norm back in 01, and pretty much most video games released before.
Row your boat gently down to the stream. Whoa, I think my dinghy hanging out.
An action hero protagonist for a video game with the depth of noir detectives was practically unheard of, but more importantly, thrilling. Nowadays, you see games coming out left and right being mature cinematic stories and continuously regurgitated by Sony. It's weird to see it be what's sought after in today's mainstream market when we've already had games with mature stories and cinematic flourishes made before. Max Payne is about a man dealing with the loss of his family and the corruption of his city, while also being accompanied by awesome shootouts. Max Payne's story isn't as complex as, say, the writing of Disco Elysium or Fallout New Vegas, where with the latter there are people who are still discussing which faction was the best choice for the player to make. Max Payne is focused enough on the story to not be at the expense of gameplay, an excuse to shoot up a bunch of New York gangsters and suited guards. But it also builds onto that by creating a substantial and sympathetic character with Max Payne. Sure, the game creates an immersive world with an apocalyptic New York being ravaged on all sides by corruption, drug addiction, and a record-breaking blizzard. Max Payne, the character, is what keeps players wanting to continue onward through hell. They want to avenge his family, they want to clear his name, they want Max to climb out of the pit he's been living in for God knows how long. It's a straightforward premise, but it's done so well. Aside from the great hook, gameplay-wise and narratively, the game has some really cool symbolism. The Aesir Corporation being representative of, well, the Aesir of Norse mythology. You know, the quote-unquote good gods like Odin, Thor, yada yada. The Aesir from the legends are, for lack of a better word, selfish. The game's Aesir Corporation accurately fits the definition of greed. They only care for their profits and for their secret wonder drug v.e.a.r to succeed. A terrible concoction, perfectly described as a witch's brew by Max himself, since the owner of Aesir is the sole reason it continues to exist and terrorize New York. Funnily enough, Odin isn't the main villain of the game. He's represented by Alfred Woden, the last name being a Germanic interpretation of Odin. Here he is with his eye patch and wisdom, doing some divine intervention every once in a while with his all-knowing omnipresence by delivering advice through the nearest payphone. Odin's selfishness is also present since Woden mostly uses Max to clean up his own mess. But I've forgotten the biggest reference to the mythos, Ragnarok. The game emphasizes that it's as if the world is coming to an end. To be fair, The game does follow through with the mythos as the Aesir Corporation meets their fate just as the Aesir gods do in the Norse's vision of Doomsday. Max is like Surtur, the flame giant, walking into Asgard, setting everything ablaze in his path of destruction. Though this hyperbolic vision of New York isn't too far from the truth. While it seems like it's the end with how hellish the world is, it's definitely the end of Max's world. After the death of his family, the last thing that kept his mental state from deteriorating was his DEA friend, Alex. But with Alex gone, he had nothing to give him any sense of normality. Nothing to stop him from going off into the deep end, a downward spiral into legend and absurdity, which can help make sense of the somewhat weird fourth wall breaks in the story.
You're in a computer game, Max.
The truth was a burning green crack through my brain, weapon statistics hanging in the air glimpsed out of the corner of my eye.
Things have gotten so bad for Max that it feels like it's a bad joke. A stage play of trauma, a scene out of a movie titled The Rise and Fall of Max Payne. Of all those things, Max's world is none of them. It's his life, something taken for granted and abused by some monstrous conglomerate who couldn't care less for him or its soldiers. So it only seems fitting for Max to go face them with the suave boldness of noir detectives and the determined finesse of action heroes. Max Payne's journey may not be as crazy as a story about the cycles of guilt or a game where the gameplay and narrative work together to create Ludonera whatever that stupid term is. Max Payne's story is simple and as old as tales go, but it provided a lot more than was offered in a lot of games that were released beside it and before it. The story is not politically complex or ambiguous beyond reason, but it's competently written. The way it weaves its influences into a coherent story is amazing, but to also then get the player to sympathize with Max without being overly serious makes it great. In other words, Max's story is not only compelling, but also entertaining as hell.
And all who stand in her way must die!
If there was one thing to name that kept players going, it was definitely the gameplay. If you could cut out the narrative and solely focus on how Max can make jumping into a gunfight look fun, then you get an intoxicatingly cathartic game that can only be improved as new games were released. The promise of explosive encounters filled with pizzazz and heartbeat decisions is one of the main draws to Max Payne. It was certainly one of the fundamental ideas to perfect when making the game, and it worked since slow-mo shootouts are synonymous with the franchise. But it'd be absolutely wrong of me and anybody else to not say that the story is just as important as the gameplay for the series, or more importantly, its protagonist. The combat, while being the star of the show, works in tandem with the story to make the games what they are, a broken man getting justice through vengeance while trying to get his life together. It may seem odd for a video about Max Payne to discuss the writing as much as the gameplay, but for an action-oriented game from its time, the great writing is something to praise. Half-Life may have been one of the most successful games in the industry to show that games can have stories. But Max Payne is an early example of how a game can be as cinematic as its inspirations. With a focus on movie-inspired action and story writing, Remedy were still able to make a fun game with engaging gameplay. While the second and third games built upon the gunplay and combat, they also further developed Max into one of the best written characters in the medium. Max Payne isn't trying to save the world, and he doesn't have to when there's been so many Duke Nukems, Gordon Freemans, and Marios. Sometimes a game's story just needs to be more personal with a character. Sometimes we should embody a person trying to put a figurative band-aid on their past. Sometimes a game's story, instead of having to be about saving humanity or the galaxy, it just needs to be about saving Max Payne's world. But being filled with sick-ass bullet time moments is more than welcome. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then leaving a like and comment would be pretty cool to help me with the algorithm, so I'd appreciate it a lot. Also, if you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing for more videos like this one, and check out my last two videos if they interest you. I put more effort than I should into these videos, but it's a fun hobby to have regardless. Anyways, Max Payne's a great franchise that I wanted to make a video on once I heard of the remakes being announced. I remember playing the games for the first time and just being in awe of the action and wondering how I hadn't played anything with combat as stylish or destructive. Don't worry, I played f.e.a.r. quickly after the Payne trilogy, so please don't go commenting about f.e.a.r. Though, the remakes gave me the final push to revisit the games and see why I liked the first one as much as I did. This video was originally going to additionally talk about Max Payne 2, but because of time and, well, this video's length, I decided to cut it. Max Payne 2 is not drastically different to the first game as compared to 3, so I thought I might as well bundle it, but I ended up talking about a lot in this one, so there goes that idea. Maybe I'll make a video on the second and third game one day, who knows, time will only tell. I hope everybody's had a good start to 2023 and enjoyed the holidays. I'll be seeing you whenever I get to making another video, which would be... yeah. Which would be whenever. Have a good one.